Right. Let's start here. Welcome to this panel that we titled LLM from POC to Production, Insights from an Infrastructure Viewpoint. I'm Lior Berry here, Director of Engineering at Fiddler AI. And today in this panel, I have the pleasure of hosting a panel of experts, technical leaders who drive some of the most common platforms out there that power AI and LLMs. And given that they're, managing those platforms, they see a lot of use cases, a lot of users coming in with different needs, and as such, they would be able to help us gain some interesting insights. So let me present the panelists for today. So we have Juan Bustos, who is the lead solutions consultant at Google's AI Center of Excellence. We have Alan Ho, VP Product AI at Datastax, and we have Nirmalya, Principal Product Manager, Conversational AI and Deep Learning at NVIDIA. So welcome, folks, to the panel. And I think we can dive right into it. All right. So given that this session is kind of, we have this like infrastructure point of view, I wanted to start with a more high-level question, maybe even more future-looking. So we've seen over the past, couple of years, and even more so in the last year, a lot of new type of infrastructure emerging with kind of AI-specific capabilities in mind. Anywhere from the hardware, from dedicated chipsets, through new types of databases, embedding vectors, all the way to whole new platforms for hosting, serving, training models. And I'd love to get your thought about where do you think this is going? What new things are we going to see? What's not going to stick around? What is going to sort of just see some incremental improvements? And would love to get your take here. Maybe we start with Juan. Maybe you want to share some of your insights.
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Lior. It's such an honor to be part of this panel. So being forward-looking, of course, we are seeing an increased sophistication of the capabilities of the models. We're seeing some approaches to create bigger, larger models. But honestly, I do believe that we will shift from that vision that one model will rule them all to something more purpose-made models that are more easily to manage. As we are maturing on the use cases, we are developing different techniques and frameworks that allows us to really achieve the results versus, like, I don't want to call it brute forcing, but versus brute forcing. So to me, it's more about maturity in terms of the frameworks and maturity about methodologies for putting together these use cases.
Got it. Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing things are moving, honestly, on a day-by-day basis. I'm still surprised to how much new stuff happens in every week, let alone the OpenAI kind of Dev Day, etc. Alan, kind of maybe you can also provide some of the database angle here.
Yeah, I think for what Juan said, what's happening is we're really starting to see the architecture that Jan LeCun had posted in his seminal paper, Pathway to Autonomous Machine Intelligence in 2021, whereby we're going to be having a combination of much smaller models that are doing different things, such as perception, planning, simulating the world, as well as cost analysis, cost function analysis. And we're also going to start seeing the separation of memory versus the model. Namely, the models will be more in charge of things like language understanding, whereas the memory systems like the databases will contain the facts. And this will mean that less of the information and the facts are going to be encoded in the weights and biases of a transformer network, and rather the facts will be explicitly fetched from databases.
And I'm guessing that also means, for instance, later on we can talk about latencies and what does it mean to fetch from a database, and suddenly you've got all sorts of moving parts here, right? So from an infrastructure standpoint, it now introduces new types of problems. So I think we'll get to talk about it later on. Nirmalya, I thought maybe you can offer also some of the hardware kind of trends, or what you guys kind of see as what's coming.
Yeah, thank you. And once again, it is a pleasure to be part of the panel. So NVIDIA, as you know, Lior, of course, it's a hardware GPU company, but, it provides the full solution, software solution stack. So going forward, what we look at as my colleagues in the panel said, that there will be purpose-built model, there'll be vectorized databases. To extend that discussion, I will say you will see, as you mentioned, latency. One of the bigger issues, you will see low precision quantized models, and you will see the newer generation of chipsets, hardware, which is enabling that. So just that's perfect segue to the NVIDIA's, kind of the hardware you're seeing, or any hardware you are seeing, where you are finding a low precision, like, FP8 kind of optimization. So the two things, if you take the discussion at a higher level, the two aspects of a large language model you want to see. You want to see the reduced time to train, and you want to see the higher, better inference, meaning the, lower latency and better throughput. So at any, solution, what industry looks at, we are trying to ensure that we increase those efficiencies such that the time to train reduces and the efficiency increases. What another trend we see is the large language model will not only remain a data center centric. We are seeing the large language model, at least the fine tuning and inferencing, coming to the edge. Right, it's coming to the edge computing, and we are trying to enable. We are seeing that we will see from the next frontier. We'll see there is a lot of new generation of those kind of infrastructure come. And lastly, what I will say is from a software stack, I agree with both the panelists. So to enable lower latency, you will like to have, as I mentioned, low precision quantization, distillation, group query attention, those kinds of techniques. So more likely you will see a little bit smaller model per se, but with a lot of knowledge for that particular task. So overall, those are the trends and frontier, both on the hardware side and the system side, we can see.
I just want to also add one more point before.
Yeah, go ahead.
The other area is hallucinations. By far is the biggest issue with large language models. And although there's new techniques like retrieval augmented generation, there's now a new crop of techniques that's including reasoning, namely like chain of thought, self-consistency, etc. So these, which are actually much more expensive techniques and slower techniques, which goes into the other part, which is latency as well. Like how do we get enough speed while reasoning at the same time?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the models are in a way getting more and more complicated, and now we're adding more layers or more modalities to them, and that has definitely impacts on the hardware and the infrastructure that's being used there. So I want to kind of move on to maybe closer to the title of the session, but in reality, again, with ChatGPT and the advancements, we see a lot of companies out there trying to prototype or play around with LLMs, for their own use cases. There's a wide range of these, and I sort of argue that, again, coming up with the POC is the easier part of the puzzle. The hard part is really taking this into production, and how do we get this to be something that is like reliable, robust, safe in all sorts of like different ways. And from your vantage point, I'd say, what is some advice that you can give, or somebody that's, say, sitting there or even listening right now to this session and they're in this POC state and they're thinking, I'll add one more thing. I think I heard in a previous session that right now there's a lot of acrobatics going on. So taking the POC production means all sorts of like wiring even the infrastructure level. So I'd love, again, your guys' take on what's the advice you'd give from somebody trying to move from LLM as a POC to LLM as production grade. And again, maybe Juan, if you Want to take this?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest things that we are seeing, and as we are seeing these use cases to mature, we are seeing also what are the caveats or the big no-nos that you can get as results, right? As Alan mentioned, hallucinations are top of mind, and that's one of the largest issues that you may come across when building your POCs. I think that, and this is something that we are working with our partners and customers, is to identify and define what are the frameworks and best practices to start iterating. One thing that is very exciting about this time and also extremely scary is that you get to experiment fairly quickly. Like, you can just start working against an LLM, sending the prompt, serving, that's pretty much it. That's your first iteration. But then you may start to notice like, hey, there are some hallucinations or maybe a lot of hallucinations, and then you start adding more pieces to the equation. Like, for example, you can leverage techniques such as chain of thought. Later, you can add RAG, retrieval augmented generation, and then you start building and defining what are the different steps. So my take always is, first of all, keep clear what is your use case. See, when you define your use case, also define what are your metrics for success, and monitor those metrics very close. And this is not only on the serving portion of it, on deployment, but also when you're starting to in the initial portions of like, hey, what are your initial results? How are you measuring how you're evolving? And this is also like, we transition from ML ops to LLM ops, right? So this is something that is ongoing. So to summarize, put together a framework. We have recommendations and best practices for them, and monitor and keep your eyes very close to your results. And don't forget what you're trying to achieve with your use case.
And I'm guessing you also mean that some of the measurements and things you need to do starting at the POC stage, so not wait until it hits production and only then start to measure, right?
Exactly. This is not something that you will be organically getting to production. This is something that you will promote, but also you need to define what is the scope of what is success.
Yep. Ellen?
Yeah, I think this very similar evaluation frameworks are very important very early on before you go to production, and constantly being able to monitor what's going in production as well. That's why we're working also with Fiddler AI on that latter problem as well for our own LLMs. I would say the one of the issues is hallucinations is definitely probably the number one issue. It requires a lot of different techniques out there, and I think one of the big issues that we see is that people start hitting the latency issues when they start using things like chain of thought, because you ended up having to make multiple calls to LLMs. Some of those calls are in series, some of them are in parallel. You're making a lot of parallel calls to vector databases. So these, unfortunately, the devil's in the details. So when you talk about your infrastructure, you really got to make sure that you cost out what are the various latency budgets you have, and then try to achieve 10 times better than that for your POC. Because by the time you layer on all these complicated things, such as a chain of thought, you're going to be ending up with a slow LLM in reality. The other thing I would say too is that you can't. You do have to go try it out and just do it and go into production. But make sure you go into production not flying blind. And the reason why is a lot of these things, you just can't game it out. You just can't game out human behavior in a test environment. That makes it, you can't do it. We don't have millions of, well, maybe if we create millions of humans in LLMs and to test things out, maybe that's possible. But we just have to go to production very quickly, which means that you do want to leverage a lot of the frameworks that implement a lot of these different techniques. LangChain seems to always implement the latest paper 10 minutes after is pushed to the archive. So things of that sort, you want to be able to leverage in order to get them to move faster.
Yeah. And maybe just one quick follow-up question. So latencies, how would you say, what is the couple of top levers. If I'm hitting some latency, what should I sort of consider?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit. So the main piece of the latency are your LLMs as well as your vector databases. Those are probably going to be the two biggest source of latency. And for the LLMs, the good thing about LLMs is they're stateless, so you can scale them out. So having a scale out architecture for your LLMs and being able to make parallel calls of your LLMs is a great way to decrease latency. Same with vector databases as well. Selecting a vector database that allows you to parallelize those the calls quickly, that reduces the latency significantly. The other part too is that some of the different techniques, such as the React pattern, this is a pattern from Google. They're serial, and unfortunately they can't get away from that. And so one of the techniques you can use is caching the LLM calls using a vector database, because you're not doing key value. You can't use simple key value pair lookups for caching LLM calls. It needs to be, you want semantic lookups. And the other area is instruction fine tuning. So when you have many LLM calls you need to do one over a time, you could actually skip a lot of those steps by leveraging the fine-tuning APIs provided by OpenAI, Google Vertex AI, et cetera, et cetera. So those are some specific tips and tricks you can do.
Yeah, thank you. And Nirmalya, by the way, I just kind of want to call it, I saw some of the poll results, and it looks like about 50% of you are either already in advanced POC or even in production, and I think about 43% are in early exploration. So everybody is kind of doing it. And I think some of the insights that Alan and Juan, and I'm sure in a minute Nirmalya will share, are definitely relevant. So Nirmalya, yeah, I'd love to hear kind of some of your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to build upon the latency, what Alan was saying. Definitely those are the good techniques. At the same time, as I was mentioning, choosing the right model. There's a fundamental thing in the LLM, it's not always the biggest model produces you the best results, right? So the choosing the right model, and as you see, the industry is moving so fast, right? It's like, I talked about a couple of techniques we like to see, like distillation and others, but I'm sure there'll be many more new, like and low precision quantization. You like to, and always think about, what is more important to you? Accuracy, latency, what you can trade off, little. Those are the conscious thinking you need to make the right decision for you. Now, going back to all the co-panelists say, and I 100% agree to, the fundamental problem of LLM is the absence of benchmark of custom models. Trust me, gentlemen, there is no benchmark of custom models. All the benchmarks are academic. Your custom model has never seen a benchmark data. That's why you are creating your custom model, isn't it? Right? All the benchmark are either academic or something else which was not trained with your data. So understanding what Alan kind of was touched, understanding the benchmark, understanding the baseline at the beginning. That's what we always tell our partners and the customers. Do not just put a lot of data to fine tune and spend $100,000. That's not the way to do it. Understand the benchmark, understand the baseline, collect the benchmark data. If you don't have benchmark data, try to start with the closest approximation what is in the world. Then you have a baseline. Then you build on top of that, and then you decide what is right for you. There are lots of techniques, prompt engineering, p-tuning, instruction tuning, fine tuning, what suits you and what benchmark you want to go. This is a common mistake, and I see, and a common guidance we have. And lastly, what Juan was mentioning is the guardrails. There is no question how much we take care of in the data blending, data curation side of the LLM. There will be guardrails, means there will be hallucination. It's just the nature of how these things are built, right? And it is, when you are dealing with 3 trillion, 6 trillion, 9 trillion tokens, it just, you cannot avoid that certain scenario. So providing that guardrail, at least how much you can provide, where a topic topic guardrails, security guardrails, safety guardrail. You want to have your conversation within those guardrails. And we also see the, the partners and customers can create their own guardrails. So putting your discussion in the right guardrails is going to be. So those are the three aspects I think predominantly we'll see to make LLM from POC. Oh, last thing I will say, and another phenomena we see is it's not only a cloud, it's a hybrid phenomena I see, especially the larger companies. They want to do some of their workload in their on-prem, some of the workload cloud, some of the workload hybrid. So ability to understand and serve all those workloads in their hybrid, capacity, hybrid configuration is also going to be key for this LLM ecosystem.
Yeah, very important points. I think, understanding the trade-offs, right? At the end of the day, it's trade-offs across, latency, correctness, safety, all of that. I did want to kind of follow up on one point, Nirmalya, that you brought up, which is running on-prem versus on the cloud. Again, say the NVIDIA platform, for instance, offers this pretty seamlessly. So somebody out there right now listening, in an enterprise or different kind of environment, thinking about what are the trade-offs, why should I, or what are considerations that I should put in place when I consider running this on-prem versus in the cloud, any specific challenges I should be watching out for. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit.
Sure. Look, from infrastructure perspective, probably when it goes to the data center, it's all curated and created for you. It's as simple as that. You bring your data and start, either training or deploying. Whereas when you are looking at it on-prem, you have to bring up the whole cluster. Of course, NVIDIA provides guides, but these are not very easy systems. They said you want to provide, you have to look at the right interconnect, which is very important. It's not, doesn't work on efficiently on Ethernet. You have to like InfiniBand, high speed, So understanding those cluster management, all these kinds of things is very important. So, but that does not mean that someone should not do. Someone should decide what is the total cost of ownership. And especially we see where on-prem matters, financial institution, healthcare institution, where we see, not only from a cost perspective, who are sensitive more about the data that they do not want, even on a distributed scenario. So where we see those are the things, and you definitely want to have the capability, right, to stand up a cluster, and that's why we are trying to. What I mentioned, if you don't want to stand up a superplot cluster, a very complex cluster of infrastructure, you can start up with edge where you can do small fine-tuning and inferencing. So those are the things I can see from infrastructure perspective someone can think about.
Yeah, these are great points. I wanted to actually maybe Juan or Nirmalya, I was actually thinking at the end of the day, the reason somebody might be plugging in an LLM is to drive some business goal, right? We're trying to achieve something in that space, and from how do we bring, an organization that wants to get to maturity there and make sure that they're delivering with Gen AI kind of business value, but at the same time, there's regulatory aspects, there's some of the risks that we talked about. Like, what are some common best practices, metrics, tools, processes that you guys think should be considered and sort of instrumented? So, Juan or Ellen.
Yeah, I would start putting back emphasis in the framework that I was talking about, defining a life cycle and understanding what are you measuring, understanding that it's a very common approach to say, hey, I'm going to experiment with LLMs and then start thinking about fine-tuning. And sometimes there are previous steps where you can have a higher return of investment without the need of fine-tuning. Maybe with RAG, you can get where you're needing to do it. So putting a little bit of emphasis in what I said a couple of minutes ago, understanding what is the life cycle, what is the order that you are going to approach. That is our recommendation. And the best practice is start measuring, you start selecting your model, you start prompting it. Then you may want to experiment seeing the evaluation of the results. Then you may want to add some of the, for example, RAG, retrieval augmented generation, to see reducing hallucinations. Maybe then you may need to do fine tuning to get you there, but understand it as a process, as a life cycle, and measure on every step of the way.
Yeah, from my perspective, a lot of times, and by the way, Datastax has made this mistake itself, where even though we're providing infrastructure for large language models, we're using it to drive our business. And one of the demos that one of the efforts was to to create a chat bot on our website that would help developers onboard. In fact, we were using the Google Vertex AI platform for this. Sometimes you also have to look at not overshooting your goals and going for lower level goals. So initially we wanted to just not have a customer support person at all. But then it turns out there was too many hallucinations, too many errors, to the point that we couldn't actually do that. And instead we used that as a mechanism to come up with, as somebody's typing things in, we use as a mechanism to suggest answers, and then the customer service representative lets the message go through or not. And it was more of a customer service rep efficiency gain rather than a full automation that we were able to get. So it does come down to business practice, like what kind of use cases are you handling and what kind of error rate you can actually handle.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. By the way, I think we have a session later on today, a workshop about how we at Fiddler created a chatbot for our own documentation. So there's similar kind of in vein type of understandings. I wanted to also ask, maybe Nirmalya, to you, how is sort of supporting or running LLM in production different than, say, legacy prediction models? Like what are the differences?
I saw that question and I was smiling. I think that's that's why probably Fiddler is, right? A company like Fiddler. LLMOps is a different thing, right? Understanding the LLMOps, and I will objectify it, right? I don't want to talk in abstract. What are the three common things you see, what you generally don't see in the, let's call it not in large language model operation? I think everybody's talked about hallucination. The second thing is toxicity. Third is PII. Right? These are the three fundamental, you have to kind of think about, especially from an output perspective, you are going to look at, which is, there is no natural language model which is trained with 3.5 trillion, tokens, or probably 8 trillion tokens. So it has to be like, as we mentioned. So how do you solve it? Under hallucination, I think the other panelists task, toxicity. Understanding the toxicity score. And it's not important to say that I will not provide toxic results. I mean, we do not subscribe to that, philosophy. We rather subscribe to that philosophy is that, an application should have the access to the toxicity score and maybe have a chance to improve the ability to the toxicity filter, such that you understand what is the right threshold of the toxicity score. To be an example, what is a video game's toxicity score is different than a financial chatbot, right? So those are the important considerations. And lastly, PII, personal identifiable information. It's either on the input side or on output side. It's extremely difficult problem. So understanding that, everyone is writing a lot of scripts, parsers to understand PII. So taking the proper safeguard, taking the proper, ownership. And lastly, you asked the original question, Lior, is that about responsible AI? What are the policy question? What are the ethical question? A very important question to think about and answer. And that goes to the heart of the question, who owns the copyright of the output? Basically, we need to understand, the industries need to understand, whoever owns the copyright of the output needs to have a clear understanding of the, responsibility of the output. So basically what I'm trying to say is that, if you're creating an application and, if you are the responsible for the output, copyright of the output, then you should define the proper policy responsible AI of that output, right? So these are some policy questions we always thinking and trying to address.
Yeah. And since we kind of brought up the notion of LLMOps, I'm curious again, Alan, maybe you can, from your standpoint, what does LLMOps mean? And apart from the metrics, what for instance tools are missing out there, offline, online, visualization, exploration, alerting?
Yeah. So one of the, actually, I would recommend people who are looking at metrics to check out a paper called Google Lambda. They have 3 specific types of metrics: sensibility, a quality metric that takes into like sensibility, soundness, etc. Safety, very specific to what other panelists talked about, and then also groundedness, which is reducing hallucinations. I totally recommend people to take a look at that particular paper. I would say that the problem is once you have the top level metrics that you want to monitor, the second thing is almost all the customers that I've seen that are doing some sort of chat GPT stuff, some sort of language model, because we're a database vendor, they're using retrieval augmented generation. And one of the biggest issues that we've seen is the data is in the database, but the answer they're getting is not right. And the reason why is because when you are calling the database to get an answer, especially in a vector search use case, you are doing this, it's a heuristic algorithm, and you're getting content from the database, and the k-nearest neighbor algorithm, which is the underlying algorithm that's powering a lot of these things, is actually very, very susceptible to noise. So even things like accidentally including the left nav bar that's on every single page into the vector database, it gets duplicated 100,000 times, and it's semantically matching pretty much every single query. That can kill you. So being able to drill down into, for your queries, what's coming out of the database before it's being sent to the LLM, that becomes a very, very important metric to monitor for these retrieval augmented generation type applications.
Yeah. And maybe kind of one question I was always curious about, there's quite a few different, vector databases out there right now. It's we've seen sort of all sorts of like entrance to that kind of market. Like, how do I even know which one to choose? What sort of criteria? I think you kind of started touching on some of that, but again, if I'm somebody that's kind of new, I'm trying to put up my own LLM, maybe a RAG kind of base setup, what should I be looking at?
Yeah, so the devils are in the details. And I think the ultimate question, so from Datastax perspective, we run 90% of the Fortune 100, 700 enterprise customers. So we're obviously going to be serving the high end. A lot of customers, when they begin their POCs, they're basically doing POCs on a static number of PDFs. For that, to be honest, pretty much any vector database is good enough for that. But if you start getting into, so there's two components. When you start getting into more real-time data, then it matters a lot how long it takes to index the data before it's available to be retrieved. That's a super important thing, and nobody talks about it. Very few people even think about it when they do that, because when they submit the data for indexing and embedding followed by indexing, they just assume it's available immediately. No, in the reality, it can take minutes, it can take hours, it can even take days. And then it depends on the use case. So if you're like indexing static data, then it doesn't matter if it's inconsistent. But using a vector database to do caching, having that immediate indexing becomes extremely important. So it depends on the particular use case that the customer is going for. And unfortunately, it's all dependent on what use case, cost, et cetera, you're willing to maintain.
Yeah, probably a good topic for a blog post. I'm curious, I saw kind of some of the poll results, and it looks like only about 3% have like mature, I say, kind of LLM ops out there, with a lot of people sort of just entering. I wonder kind of, Juan, from your point of view, when you're talking to potential customers or people that are looking for solutions, like how do we uplift this, or what, make it more accessible, better tools, simpler to use? Is it kind of not finding the right tools? It's integration that's kind of the bottleneck. Curious kind of your thoughts there.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I think it all begins with a very solid use case and understanding what value are you bringing. Because the conversation about leveraging LLMs and Gen AI for companies, like everybody's going through that conversation now. Now, the justification for, hey, we need to invest X on making this a reality, that conversation and the return of investment is a harder question. So my take is always about understanding what is your use case, understanding what is the value you're getting from that use case, and then understanding what are you going to bring. Lior, it's very common that our customers and partners think about a chatbot as the first use case. And sometimes I push back a little in terms of that, because I generally suggest, hey, let's start with an internal use case. Let's start with a use case that you can leverage summarization, metadata extraction. This will make your InfoSec teams way more comfortable understanding the platform. Your DevOps teams, your LLMOps team that you're starting with will start get familiar with the metrics, and you will start getting into the flow of what it means to productionize a use case that's leveraging LLMs. So I think that the biggest value is there. And again, I'm sounding like a broken record, but defining the life cycle, following methodology for the growth and the maturity of the product is very important.
Yep. Clearly, this is a world that's evolving. Again, kind of course, we at Fiddler are building some of those tools as well. I'd love to, one challenge that I see, that this kind of world is moving so fast that I almost wonder, if I'm starting to build something, it sounds like within 3-4 months, it might be in a way outdated, or I'm no longer using the best kind of practice. What's your advice for how to approach this, right? It feels like, no matter what I do, in 6 months, it might be kind of, I'm no longer sitting on top of the best infrastructure that I could be, but at the same time, I don't want to kind of rattle the ship all the time. So what's your advice there? I don't know, maybe Alan, you want to take a stab?
Yeah. So there was a customer, there was an attendee who asked like, hey, I'm prototyping with LangChain. And then LangChain is it's almost like the PyTorch of LLMs, because everybody hates it, but at the same time, everybody uses it. And there's a good reason why people are using it. And by the way, Datastax is a very big supporter of LangChain project. I personally talked with Harris, and he's a great manager he manages the project very well. You want to make sure that you're part of there's no time to read all the papers in the world. That's the problem. It's coming out so quickly. And so you want to make sure you have an infrastructure, you're leveraging framework components that are implementing things very quickly. And you can see like OpenAI, they're always adding new models. Same with Meta, same with Google. If you don't want to get left behind, you do want to think about leveraging a provider that gives you access to a lot of the latest models. So that's on the model side. But then there's the technique side, such as, self-consistency, chain of thought, all the variations of that. That's more in the frameworks. That's in the frameworks regime, like LangChain, Llama Index, et cetera, et cetera. So I strongly recommend people to use one of those, because you start getting to pick up those, even with all the warts it has, because it lets you pick up the latest and greatest, so that you're staying on top of things. And also gives you the flexibility, because you may launch your product and realize, oh, there's too many hallucinations. But then a couple months down the road, there might be some advancements in the LLMs or the frameworks itself, in the techniques, hallucination reduction techniques, that makes it practical. And you want to turn that on as quickly as possible.
Yeah, if I may add to that is, NVIDIA also has a large language model service, which is it's very interesting when you see the data, when it comes to the data, it is traditional NLP applications migrating to the LLM. You look at the data, which will surprise you, right? You will think that a lot of the content generation applications will, but it's not. In what industry knows, industry is migrating from one to another, which is supposedly best. So my suggestion is very simple. Do not you have to look into always the latest thing. Just figure out what you want to do and do the best in the LLM ecosystem to make it practical. When you transition an NLP application to an LLM application, probably the understanding piece will be exactly same, like the intent classification, but the response generation will be different. Now we have the power of LLM to do response generation. Take advantage of that. So for the next 2 years, whatever the applications you are familiar with, if you're migrated to LLM, you don't have to always think, what is the next paper? What is all that, just do the thing, what you want to do, know what you know best, take the advantage of LLM, besides understanding it does the generation. That will be my simple suggestion, and it works. The second thing I will tell you, Lior, your first question is where we are seeing the missing of the LLMOps. LLMOps somehow is what we find in our company is not integrated with completely with the LLM chain. So tools have to be there where the LLM is there, meaning if I am going to create a custom model, I should not have to take the custom model and can take the model from another tool. So that's what one thing as an industry, if we can improve, make the LLMOps tool available where I am interacting with the whole LLM chain. Either it is the evaluation or it is the human tooling for instruction tuning like RLHF. That is where we are thinking, I'm sure whole industry is thinking, those are the improvement points, either from application or from LLMOps tool chain, I see.
Yep, definitely valid points. One sort of question or comment that I see in the from the audience, which is there is also the regulatory side, which might change, right? In fact, we know that there's some regulations coming, et cetera. It's not exactly clear. So that alone might force somebody to kind of now tune the infrastructure, because now there's like a need to have an audit trail or I don't know what. So that might be a kind of external force. Think about the legal implications out of Juan, and any advice there, or how to sort of stay compliant, right?
Talk to your lawyers very often. I mean, this is latent space. Of course, data security is data security, and that doesn't change. One of the things that we always tell our partners and our customers is like, if you're running and this is not a plug, but if you're running your workload on Vertex AI, your data is already secure. We don't use your data for training. But as the regulatory landscape evolves, it is very important to be up to speed with what is being enforced and being able to instrument those changes as quick as possible. As you said, adding like the audit trail, adding visibility. And there's also some pre-work done with responsible AI, which actually this goes in line with the regulatory requirements that are coming. But yeah, it's you need to be up with the news, and this is not something that you will set and forget.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is more or less the time for us. It was great to hear all your comments and smart ideas and pointers. I think we even have some paper references for people to read. Kirti?
Yes, awesome. Thanks, Lior, Juan, Alan, and Nirmalya. That was awesome. I love the fact that we talked about so many different points beyond infrastructure and all the way to compliance as well. So that was great.